Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be making my easy no fuss daily sourdough bread with fresh milk flour. And I wanted to record because this time I'm going to be making it without a mixer. I have had requests to see how I do my process without a mixer. So that's what I'm going to do here today. Here I have my fresh milled flour. I've also mixed in my vital wheat gluten, which is optional, but I do like to use it just for a slightly more open crumb. Here I have my bowl that I'm going to add my water to. The exact measurements will be in the description box. I'll have the recipe linked in the description box down below. So to my empty bowl, I'm going to add my water, and I'm just using room temperature water. Okay. Okay, and now I'm going to add in my sourdough starter. Back in the fridge. I'm now going to give that a stir to make sure that the starter is well incorporated. And I'm just using a Danish whisk or a Danish dough hook. All right, so I have that mixed in. I'm purposely leaving out my salt. I'm going to get everything else mixed up, and then I'm going to come back and add the salt in about 30 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and put in my flour. And this is fresh milled flour. I milled it in my Nutri-Mill Classic Grain Mill. I'm going to go ahead and give this a mix. Just want to get the flour nicely incorporated and then allow this to sit. Now this is called a fermentalise because the starter is added. But because sourdough is such a long process as it is, I don't find it necessary to autolyse the dough with just the water and the flour, because I find that it has plenty of time to absorb all of the liquids before it truly starts rising. So I like to add my starter in at the beginning. Okay, so looks like our flour is nicely incorporated. So I'm going to allow this to sit. Okay, so I'm going to cover this with one of my plastics here and come back and start my stretch and folds and add in my salt in 30 minutes. Okay, so it's been 30 minutes and this has been sitting here. So now it's time to add the salt. So as you can see, the gluten has already started to develop without us doing any work. So I'm going to go ahead and add the salt. Don't be afraid to add more water throughout this process if ever you feel like your dough is dry. You never have to follow a recipe exact. Certain conditions can be different. One batch of grain is always going to be slightly different from the next. So your grain may absorb more flour or more water, or it may absorb less. So just always go by how your dough feels and looks, and not necessarily just based off of what the recipe says. So I'm going to squeeze this in really good because I want my salt to be very well incorporated. And as you can see, salt makes the gluten tight. If you've ever tried to mix your starter with salt and tried to make it dissolve in water, you'd see that it starts to clump together and it doesn't want to mix. And that is because salt makes gluten tight. And that's why in a lot of my recipes, you'll see that I wait to add the salt and the yeast, whereas a lot of recipes, you only have to wait to add the yeast. And I do that intentionally because I find it a little bit faster to get a window pane when I add in the salt with the yeast, because it just brings everything together so nicely. Look at that already. Just from adding in the salt, it made this a nice tight ball. I am going to mess this ball up though, because I just want to make sure that that salt is all the way in the dough. Very nicely incorporated. Now, if you're not using the optional Vital Wheat gluten, yours may not come together as quickly, and that is perfectly fine. We still have plenty of time to develop gluten within this dough. So I'm starting the process in this bowl, but you will see that after I'm done with the stretch and folds, I will change bowls, because a clear straight edge container really helps to be able to track how much your dough has risen. With a bowl like this, I'd really have to guess, because the edges are very curved. The edges are very curved, and also the bowl is not even clear. So there would be a lot of guesswork involved with figuring out how much it's risen. If you're very experienced with just knowing what the dough looks like when it's done with bulk fermentation, it may not be necessary. But for me personally, even though I've been making sourdough bread for a couple of years now, I still do it because I'm busy and I just want to make sure that I get it right. And I don't want to waste any ingredients. So I think the salt's pretty well combined now. So I'm going to go ahead and cover it back. And I'm going to come back in 15 minutes to do another stretch and fold. I mean, technically this was not considered a stretch and fold because I was incorporating the salt. So this next, when we come back after this 15-minute break, will be our official first stretch and fold. Okay, so it's been about 15 to 20 minutes. So I have a bowl here for some water. I like to wet my hands so that the dough does not stick to my hands. So I get my hand under the dough and I just pull and stretch it up, and then I turn my bowl and I do the same thing for the next part of the dough, and I just continue to go around stretching the dough until it becomes too tight to stretch. So I'm pulling the dough up and stretching it over on itself, and I'm folding it in towards the center of the dough. And then once I can't stretch it anymore, I just take the dough and I flip it over so that the smooth side is up, and cover. And now I'm back for the second stretch and fold, and I'm repeating the same thing. I'm wetting my hands, and this time you will notice that the dough does not stretch as far, and that's because the gluten is still tighter. It hasn't had very long to rest, and so I'm pulling it up and stretching it over itself. And then again, once I can't stretch it anymore, I just flip the dough over and I cover it. Okay, so it's been another 15 to 20 minutes, and this is my third and final stretch and fold. Again, this is the tightest that the dough has been, which is good. It lets me know that the gluten is nicely developed. I have my tortilla press there because on this day I was getting ready to press out some tortillas for dinner. So that's why you see that there. But I just go ahead and do a few stretch and folds. I turn the dough over again, and now I'm going to cover it. And I'm actually going to transfer this now to a straight edge container, and I'm lightly oiling it. And I like to put it in here so that I can easily track how much it has risen. So I go ahead and put it in my container, I put the top on, and then I mark the side to see how high it starts. And now bulk fermentation is done. I did not watch the clock, so I can't even tell you how long it's been. I never watch the clock. I just watch the dough and let it take however long it needs. So now I am putting some drips of water on my table to help for the dough not to stick. Now, I'm so used to making more than one loaf at a time, and so I'm going ahead and pre-shaping. This is unnecessary for only making one loaf. I typically only pre-shape when I'm having to divide the dough. That way I can reorganize the gluten strands, but it didn't even register with me, and I just went straight to pre-shaping since I'm so used to it. But if you're only making one loaf, you can flip it out of the container and go straight into shaping the loaf. But since I pre-shaped, I let it rest for 15 minutes on the counter after I shaped. And now I'm going to go ahead and do the final shaping here. Again, you can simply get straight into the final shaping if you're only making one loaf. So here I'm just taking the sides of the dough and I take the left side, pull it in towards the center, take the right side, pull it into the center, and then I roll it up like a log and I close the ends of that log. Then I just gently put that into my Banneton. If you are doing this in a loaf pan, at this point you would put it seam side down into your loaf pan. I'm just gently pinching the seams closed on the outside of the dough. I find that it's important to do this neat, especially when doing a batard, because you want your loaf to look nice when it's baked. Any imperfections during shaping will show through on your final loaf. I'm gonna stick this in my fridge and continue the process in the morning. And so here we are, it is the next morning. If I had started this in the morning, I typically bake at night, but I had started this loaf in the evening. So I am baking the next morning. So I'm just poking the dough to check to see how proofed it is. So I'm flipping it out on parchment paper and going to use my bread lane to go ahead and score my loaf. You want to score it nice and deep. Before scoring, you should have your oven preheated to 450 degrees with your Dutch oven inside. Bake for 20 minutes covered and about 20 to 30 minutes uncovered until you reach an internal temperature of about 205 to 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And here is my final loaf. I would love to hear you all's thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching.